All right. I consider myself a bit of a history buff, and I love big numbers, especially when they're financial numbers. So, continuing on with my Who series, I thought what better than to look at some of or who has some of the largest Bitcoin transactions in history. Lucky for me, there is a article 7 historic Bitcoin transactions that consolidates it that makes it pretty fun. So let's jump right in. So obviously you have the original transaction, which is considered the Genesis block, which was by Satoshi Nakamoto, which if you're not sure who that is, check out our videos or a video we just recorded on Mr. Nakamoto. But that happened on January 9th, 2009. So that's the very first Genesis block, the very first block mined for Bitcoin. And interesting enough, I'd heard this before, but I don't know if I'd actually had seen it. But within that block, you can kind of see down on this right-hand side that he had inscribed in there that January 3rd, 2009, Chancellor on the brink of second bailout or bankruptcy. So the underlying story with Satoshi and him creating Bitcoin and putting this all together was he was extremely frustrated, like many of us, with the collapse of the financial markets, number one, but more was that these major entities were getting bailed out while the average person was just eating dirt. Like, so creates Bitcoin, and within his first block inscribes comments about the chancellor about to get bailed out again. So that was the first transaction. Then shortly after that, Satoshi sent 10 BTC to Hal Finney, which was the first peer-to-peer Bitcoin transaction. That was January 12th, 2009. It's easy to just glance over that, but that was the first peer-to-peer. Like, that obviously proved this, at least initially, is working. I don't need to send this through a third-party person. I can send it directly peer-to-peer. Now, Bitcoin didn't have any value at that point, but it proved that you could just send a transaction without an intermediary.
It's crazy because back then 10 BTC would have been just, I mean, it was literally nothing. But even for 5 or 6 more years after that, that's a fart in the wind. You know what I mean? 10 Bitcoin. And it's like, that's a $700,000 transaction on today's cost.
I thought about that. You know, why 10 BTC? Because you like when it's worth nothing,
bro, you tripping.
Like, why 10? Did, like, in his brain, did he, like, was he already visioning that, like, this is going to be worth something? So 10 Bitcoin is something? Or like, it just seems, that seems so. Why didn't you send 10,000 or why wouldn't you just send 1 million?
Or
like my brain would.
If there's 21 million total, then they weren't even mined at the time because, you know, they were set on, I don't know what the
good point,
but there's 21 million total. So you don't want to send it. You don't know whether Hal Finney's going to continue or be like, oh, that's cool, and then go away. And now you've gotten rid of 6% of the total overall forever Bitcoin, you know. But it is an interesting number why you chose 10 and not 1 or 100 or 5. You know what I mean? Like, it's
because it would be interesting to see how many Bitcoin had been mined at that point by January 12th of 2009, right? Like, was it a couple hundred or something like that? It wouldn't have been. So 10 would make a lot more sense. Are you looking that up?
Yep. What year was it? 2012?
2009. Yep. January 12th, 2009. Moving on, October 12th, 2009, Bitcoin for fiat currency exchange. So this is the first time that Bitcoin was exchanged for an actual fiat, 5,050 BTC for $5.02 via PayPal. So that's the first time that it actually had some value put on it as far as fiat value. Also interesting is that would be valued at about $216 million today. So 5,050 BTC. And then, of course, the one that most of us know is Pizza Day. 10,000 BTC, purchased 2 pizzas on May 22nd, 2010. Here's like the actual blurb about it that was typed on the web to see about getting it to work. And it's so interesting because you can see the mind is processing how this is, how's this supposed to work? And it's things that we just take for granted. Also interesting is that would be worth $427 million at today's price. This article is a couple months old, so give or take there. So for 2 pizzas, 427 million. And then, of course, you had Mt. Gox. He transferred the largest amount of Bitcoin in history at that point in 2011, June of 2011, which was 442,000 Bitcoin, $18.8 billion today. Again, something that is easily overlooked if you're not super familiar with Bitcoin is he transferred that large sum of Bitcoin at like, $1 or whatever the price was. It's not in this article, but it's essentially minimal. So, and it doesn't matter. It wasn't worth $18.8 billion then, but even if he transferred it today, the cost is dollars, right? What would that cost you if you were transferring gold or Western Union or whatever, Bankwire?
Yeah.
Imagine the hurdle. Monster transaction fee. This guy, let's see, what was the date here? In 2013, this guy transfers 98 BTC.
Real bad man.
And he accidentally paid a 30 Bitcoin fee on it. So over $1 million, you can see the transaction down here. I didn't get the backstory on how that happened, but interesting enough, the mining pool actually gave him back roughly $1 million out of that deal. So some good people in the Bitcoin world. And then, of course, the auction of 30,000 BTC, which was confiscated by the U.S. Marshals from the Silk Road Underground. Tim Draper bought it in 2014 for 18.7 million. It's now worth 576 million roughly. Quite the investment. No, I'm sorry. That's not right, is it? No, 1.2 billion in today's dollars. So paid 18.7 2014, 4 years later, worth 1.2 billion. Tim Draper, if you're not familiar with him, he's a tech investor, very, very up to speed with these type of things, even back in 2014, clearly. So that's your 7 notable largest Bitcoin transactions. Sure, there's a lot more that you could argue could be on that list.
Well, there's
there
a couple
too.
on there I've never heard of, and those are interesting stories. Like a 30 Bitcoin transaction fee. Ugh.
Yeah, that seems like a mistake, seems like a very painful. I mean, I know when I'm transferring a couple dollars, like I relook at my password like 8 times, like the whole and even still I'll make mistakes. I sent $100 in Bitcoin as a test transfer the other day or a couple months ago and sent it to a freaking Ethernet address. Luckily, that's why I still do these stupid tests, because I was getting ready to send, a decent amount more than that. So it cost me $100. But when I did that, I thought there's $100 in Bitcoin that is gone forever. That's that is non-existent now. And then I was like, well, that's kind of cool. And then I was like, shit, if I do believe that each Bitcoin is going to be worth, $100 million in the future, that $100, I was like, I'm not even going to do the math. That's way more than $100 I just threw into cyberspace.
Yes, you've just chucked off $100,000 into cyberspace. I did the same. There's so many networks now. I sent some stuff from Polygon network to Ethereum network, and I'm like, it never showed up. And then I was like, oh no, you get that panicky feeling, and you go back. It's like, well, it's never going to show up. God damn it!
Wrong address. You got to make sure you're on the proper network. I
bet I could come up with 7 historic bin crypto transactions that changed my world. Yeah, like my biggest ones that I've either lost or have cashed out. You know what I mean? Like historic bin Kirsting crypto transactions. There's a list for me.
Yeah, that there it is getting up there. You've had some pretty sizable transactions, and something tells me those are only going to increase in the future.